Commander VX stood before the Zoran High Council, his 4 upper appendages moving restlessly as he spoke, while his lower limbs remained perfectly still. Humans, he declared, are without question the most baffling species we have ever encountered. And that is saying something given that we have studied over 3,000 sentient civilizations. The 22 members of the High Council shifted uneasily on their hover pads, the purple ambient light of the chamber pulsing in reflection of their shared anxiety. Supreme Counselor. 6 interrupted her voice, crackling slightly through her speech apparatus. Your preliminary report mentioned contradictions. Perhaps you could elaborate, she said, pausing before adding in what passed for Zoran humor, preferably before the next cosmic expansion cycle begins. The council emitted a series of harsh clicking sounds. The Zoran equivalent of laughter. Commander VX flicked his sensory tentacle, activating a holographic display. Observe humans in their natural habitat, he said solemnly. They are simultaneously warlike and compassionate. They destroy entire ecosystems while at the same time working fanatically to preserve others. They invent medicines that save millions, yet also create weapons that can annihilate civilizations. The images on the hologram shifted quickly. Scenes of children playing in parks, soldiers training on obstacle courses, surgeons operating in brightly lit rooms, engineers building monumental skyscrapers, and artists painting breathtaking masterpieces. X tapped the console with his appendage for emphasis. They willingly inflict pain upon themselves to achieve what they call fitness. They consume toxic substances for pleasure. They create automation to ease their burdens, then panic at the thought of losing their purpose to machines. General Krax, the grizzled head of the Zoran Defense Forces, leaned forward, his gravely voice cutting through the murmurs. Are they a threat, Commander VX? Hesitated before answering. That is complicated, he said. They dedicate vast resources to warfare but invest equally into healing. Their medical facilities are extensive and found everywhere on their planet. But what is most perplexing is that despite their intelligence, they have never unified as a single species. They remain divided by invisible lines, called borders, fighting among themselves relentlessly. Science Minister Zoff dismissed the notion with a flash of bioluminescent disdain. Then they are primitive, she concluded confidently. No, VX said, his frustration evident in the rippling blue shades spreading across his skin. That is just it. Despite their divisions, their technology advances at an exponential rate. In the 300 rotations we have observed them, they have made leaps that took us millennia. They compensate for lack of unity, with relentless innovation, born from their internal competition. The Supreme Counselor's eye stalks extended fully, a sign of intense interest. Your recommendation, Commander. I advise continued observation from a safe distance. VX replied, humans are unpredictable. One moment they write poetry about the stars, the next they figure out how to harness those same stars to build weapons capable of unimaginable destruction. They create beauty and horror with equal enthusiasm. He allowed the gravity of his words to settle over the council chamber. Before any of the officials could respond, VX added his voice, lowering to a deep, serious tone. However, there is one trait that makes humans truly dangerous, which is asked. General Krax, leaning forward, when threatened, especially when their young or their healers are attacked, their divisions vanish instantly. VX paused, his exoskeleton shifting to a deep shade of indigo. They become something else, something terrifying. A heavy silence fell over the council. Only the low hum of the environmental systems could be heard. They are capable of complete and absolute unity in defense of their own, in ways that defy all known models. VX continued, when provoked, the poets become warriors. The farmers become soldiers. The scientists become strategists. They adapt, they evolve, and they do it faster than any species we have ever recorded. That is why, whatever we do, We must not provoke them until we understand them better. Establish a comprehensive threat assessment protocol. Supreme Counselor 6 ordered, her tone unusually grave, just in case, she added quietly. Little did any of them know how soon that case would become a terrifying reality, and how utterly unprepared they would be for what humanity would unleash upon the galaxy. The Zoran observation teams continued their surveillance of Earth, orbiting silently above the vibrant blue planet, their cloaking systems ensuring they remained undetected for months. They had studied human activity, documenting behaviors that seemed to defy logical classification. It was Lieutenant Pre, barely out of the academy, who first raised the alarming observation, tapping furiously on his console. Commander VX, we need to re-examine our assumptions, he said urgently. These facilities, we thought, were centers of healing. They might not be what we believed. Commander VX approached the observation deck, his posture rigid as he took in the images streaming across multiple displays. One screen showed surgeons performing open-heart surgery, another displayed dentists drilling into human teeth. A third showed vaccination centers where young humans were forcibly restrained and jabbed with sharp objects. Science Officer Jez pointed to the scenes. With growing horror, they are cutting into their own bodies with primitive tools, inserting foreign substances, draining fluids, connecting mechanical devices to their vital systems. The Zoran were accustomed to non-invasive quantum regeneration. For healing, the brutal physical procedures humans employed seemed horrifying beyond measure. Observe here, Jess said, zooming in on a cardiac surgery. They are stopping the human circulation pump, what they call a heart, and hooking it up to a machine. And look here, he added, switching feeds. They are drilling into the oral cavity of their young ones while they scream in visible distress. Lieutenant Pre turned a sickly shade of pale blue, his bioluminescence dimming rapidly. Commander VX felt a deep chill spread through his neural clusters. Could it be that we have misinterpreted their civilization entirely? He asked. The evidence seemed overwhelming. The so-called hospitals appeared more like torture chambers than centers of healing. The patients were restrained, often unconscious. The rooms were filled with sharp instruments and intimidating machines. Uniformed humans moved with authority, restraining the weak and the vulnerable, and forcing them to endure procedures that caused visible suffering. Jess nodded vigorously. It would align with our observations. Commander, note how they separate the sick from the healthy, segregating them in isolated areas where they are subjected to invasive procedures. The uniformed individuals could be guards enforcing compliance, and the beds could be platforms for punishment or restraint. VX paced the deck, his mind racing through the implications. If humans institutionalized torture on such a massive scale, they were not just unpredictable, they were barbaric. His sensory tentacle pointed to another disturbing feed, showing a maternity ward. The footage displayed women crying out in agony as infants were forcibly extracted from their bodies and then subjected to immediate medical procedures. Worse still, the newborns were poked, prodded, and sometimes even pierced with needles. The Zoran command deck fell into a horrified silence. This changes everything, VX said at last, his voice hollow with the magnitude of their discovery. If their medical facilities are indeed torture camps, then humanity itself is operating on a moral framework completely alien to us. An emergency message crackled over the communication systems. It was General Krax, his gravelly voice, leaving no room for doubt. Commander VX, the Defense Council has reviewed your latest findings. The evidence is clear. These human facilities represent a gross violation of the Galactic Sentient Rights Accord. We cannot stand by while a species systematically tortures its own kind. Prepare for intervention. VX straightened his appendages, trembling with both anticipation and unease. What kind of intervention? General, he asked cautiously. The only kind such barbarity understands. General Krax responded coldly. Tactical strikes on all major torture facilities effective. Immediately, the fleet is already mobilizing. Commander VX felt a wave of dread, his instincts warning him that they were standing on the precipice of something far larger than they understood, yet the orders were clear. Across the observation deck, the crew moved quickly, preparing for what they believed would be a swift and merciful liberation of millions of tortured souls. The humans were about to experience what the Zoran considered a humanitarian intervention, an act of righteous deliverance from cruelty. Little did the Zoran know that their misunderstanding was not just profound, it was catastrophic. In their arrogance, they believed they were rescuers, but in truth, they were about to provoke the fiercest wrath humanity had ever unleashed. The fleet descended cloaked ships moving into attack positions across the globe, poised to strike with weapons designed to incapacitate, not to kill. Believing they were about to free a suffering species from its own brutality, they had no idea that the structures they targeted were not symbols of oppression, but sanctuaries of hope and healing. They had no idea that the hands they saw wielding sharp instruments were not instruments of pain, but instruments of mercy. And above all, they had no idea that by attacking those who healed the humans, they were about to awaken a fury unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The decision had been made. The Zoran fleet began its coordinated descent toward Earth, their sleek vessels slipping through the atmosphere like shadows against the sky. Their advanced stealth technology disengaged, revealing their presence to the humans below for the first time. In cities across the world, people looked up in shock and fear as the sky was torn open by dark shapes that absorbed rather than reflected light. Commander VX stood in the command sphere of his flagship, the righteous intervention, his appendages steady though his mind raced with uncertainty. The fleet was configured for a humanitarian operation, weapons, set to non-lethal suppression fields designed to disable electronics and render targets unconscious without causing permanent harm. Remember, we are liberators, not conquerors. Admiral Thos reminded his officers as he interfaced directly with the neural network connecting the 57 vessels. Our goal is to neutralize the ability of their oppressors to inflict suffering, not to cause unnecessary casualties. Across the observation deck, holographic overlays highlighted thousands of facilities. Hospitals, clinics, research centers, nursing homes, dental offices, and more, all pulsing in sickly red on their targeting systems. Primary targets locked. Weapons Officer Grill confirmed, her voice steady despite the enormity of the task. Deploy neutralization beams, Admiral Thos ordered. The first strikes lanced down from the sky, brilliant violet beams stabbing into the earth, targeting structures in cities like New York, London, Johannesburg, and Tokyo. Within moments, power grids failed, hospital equipment went dead, patients and staff alike collapsed into unconsciousness. Emergency rooms, operating theaters, intensive care units, and ambulances all fell into eerie silence. At Boston General Hospital, Dr. Nora Chen was explaining treatment options to a leukemia patient. When the lights flickered, she reassured the frightened boy that the backup generators would kick in, but her words died away as a violet glow filled the room and the machines went dark. In Johannesburg, Memorial, Nurse Thomas and Becky was checking on a recovering 6-year-old when the child pointed out the window. Pretty lights, he said, before the light engulfed them both and they slipped into unconsciousness. All across the planet, the same scenes played out. Millions of people collapsed where they stood. Surgeries were interrupted mid-procedure. Life support systems failed in tragic silence. Ambulances responding to critical emergencies lost power and coasted to helpless stops. Back aboard the righteous intervention, Admiral Thos observed the results of Phase 1 with grim satisfaction. Casualty assessment, he demanded. The ship's AI quickly responded. Preliminary estimates suggest approximately 98.7% non-lethal compliance. Sir, however, complications have arisen in approximately 1.3% of targeted facilities. Admiral Thos frowned. Explain. In some locations, the neutralization of technological systems resulted in the failure of life-sustaining apparatus. The AI explained additionally. Several medical procedures were in critical phases that could not be safely interrupted before the effects of the suppression fields took hold. Strategic Officer Kep burst onto the command sphere, his bioluminescence flashing alarm red. "We have made a catastrophic error, sir," he gasped. "These facilities. They are not torture centers, they are healing centers." He pulled up newly decoded linguistic and cultural data. "Our anthropologists just completed comprehensive language processing. The restraints we observed are for patient safety. The invasive procedures are necessary to sustain life. The devices are advanced healing technologies, not instruments of pain." A heavy silence fell over the command sphere. Admiral Thos felt a sinking feeling in his neural clusters as realization took hold. "It is not possible," he whispered. "We all saw the suffering." "Yes, sir," Kep insisted, "but it is suffering that is necessary. Their physiology requires direct physical intervention because they lack molecular reconstruction or psychic regeneration technology. They are doing the best they can with their biological limitations." Before the Council could respond, Communications Officer Vel reported with urgent patterns across her skin. "Sir, Earth's military forces are mobilizing. Nuclear weapon systems are coming online." Admiral Thos barely had time to process this before the flagship shuddered violently under attack. Human forces were striking back with terrifying precision and ferocity. The humans were not broken by the assault. They were enraged. Their most sacred institutions had been attacked. They're healers. They're vulnerable. They're innocent. What was meant as a liberation had been perceived as an unprovoked act of war. And now the humans were answering as only they could with overwhelming unified force. Admiral Thos shouted for all fleet units to disengage, to recall the neutralization beams and deploy medical drones, but it was already too late. The damage was done. The humans had been bloodied, and their response would be merciless. Across every command screen, reports poured in human counterattacks, devastating beyond all predictions. Earth's forces had unleashed weapons and technologies the Zoran had not detected or even imagined. Quantum field disruptors, particle acceleration-based weapons, gravity, manipulation, devices, and all of it, wielded with a level of coordination that defied Zoran understanding. Their assumption that humanity was disorganized and primitive had been proven fatally wrong. Humanity was showing its true face not as a divided, squabbling species, but as a singular force, unified by the instinct to defend their own, and nothing was more sacred to them than their healers and their children. The first signs of the human response were almost too subtle to notice. Earth's communication networks surged with frantic signals, their primitive electromagnetic transmission systems becoming saturated with calls for help, orders of mobilization, and declarations of emergency. In the command sphere of the righteous intervention, Admiral Thos watched the data streams with a mounting sense of dread as he realized that humanity was not collapsing in panic, but rather coordinating with alarming speed. "Admiral, the humans are mobilizing strategic assets," reported Communications Officer Vel's sensors indicate activation of weapon systems not previously cataloged. Lieutenant Kep added color cycling between alarm red and stark white. Strategic analysis suggests Earth is preparing for a large-scale military response. Admiral Thos ordered immediate transmission of an apology across all human frequencies, explaining the misunderstanding, pleading for a cessation of hostilities. But it was already too late. The humans were not listening. They had already made their decision, in orbit above Earth. The Zoran fleet began to shudder under the first volleys of human counterattack. Beams of energy and projectiles moving at near-relativistic speeds slammed into Zoran vessels. 3 ships were destroyed within moments, their forms imploding into silent clouds of twisted debris. Admiral Thoss stared in horror. Humans had weaponized their primitive particle accelerator technology, creating localized space-time disruptions that tore through the Zoran shields with ease on the ground. Entire human cities shifted into emergency, wartime footing. Underground silos opened, revealing aircraft unlike anything the Zoran had ever seen. Sleek black vessels that seemed to absorb all light, moving with physics, defying agility. President Marcus Reynolds stood in the underground command center beneath Cheyenne Mountain, surrounded by the hastily assembled Global Defense Council. His expression was grim. Options he demanded, Secretary of Defense Wilkins responded. Conventional military retaliation would be ineffective against their superiority, sir. But humanity must respond. We cannot allow the attack on our healers to go unanswered. Vice President Harper slammed his fist on the table. We cannot let this stand. They targeted our hospitals, for God's sake. Dr. Eleanor Jackson, the president's national security advisor, cleared her throat quietly. Mr. President, I recommend we activate Protocol Archangel. It is our last resort measure. We have the technology. We must act. President Reynolds hesitated only for a moment before nodding grimly. Do it across the world. Ancient enemies became allies. Chinese submarines surfaced beside American aircraft carriers. Russian aerospace forces synchronized with NATO air patrols. Indian and Pakistani forces coordinated side by side. Japan, Germany, Brazil, Australia, all unified in one purpose: retaliation for the attack on humanity's most vulnerable. Aboard the Righteous Intervention sensors went wild, detecting new human energy signatures. Previously undetected massive facilities that had lain dormant suddenly roared to life. Humanity was activating hidden technologies they had kept secret, even from themselves: gravitational displacement drives, prototype quantum weapons, and spacefaring. Warships launched from underground bunkers. With terrifying speed, Earth shifted from a fractured political landscape into a singular planetary force. Admiral Kep reported preliminary scans of human deployments. They have vessels using prototype neural interfaces, he said, meaning their pilots are functioning with reaction times nearly instantaneous relative to ours. They are coordinating as if they are one mind. Across the surface, the first wave of humanity's hidden arsenal took flight. Leading the charge were the Seraphim squadrons, black as void, their shapes shifting against the sky with impossible grace. Their neural-linked pilots moving like one organism. Major Layla Kwan, the squadron commander, did not need to speak her commands, flowing seamlessly to her team through thought alone. They moved in perfect formation, targeting Zoran command vessels with newly adapted quantum disruption beams. Weapons that had been theoretical yesterday were now devastatingly operational. Human ground forces did not stand idle either. Coordinated missile strikes, artillery barrages, and electronic warfare blanketed the atmosphere. The Zoran defenses crumbled one by one as humans adapted to counter every move faster than any simulation could predict. At the center of it all, looming larger than anything else, was the newly launched UNSC Hypocrites, a massive human vessel with a brutal particle accelerator ring integrated into its structure. It fired a beam of coherent energy that sliced through Zoran cruisers as if they were paper. The flagship Righteous Intervention trembled under successive impacts. Admiral Thoss realized with sinking horror that the humans had not only matched Zoran technology in a fraction of the time, they had surpassed it, and they had done so under the most primal of motivations: defense of their wounded, defense of their healers and their children. Strategic Officer Kep looked up, his voice shaking. Admiral, their cultural analysis is clear. Humanity follows a sacred code among their healers. First, do no harm, but among their warriors, there is another code: an eye for an eye. They will not stop until they have answered our attack in full measure and beyond. The realization settled like lead across every mind on the command sphere. Humanity had been underestimated at every turn. Now they were unleashing a wrath born of compassion, twisted by loss, and fueled by righteous fury. The cost to the Zoran would be total, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The devastation across the Zoran fleet was unlike anything ever recorded in their long and storied history. Vessels that had been considered invincible were torn apart by human weapons that should not have existed. Humans had adapted at a speed that defied all known evolutionary models. Every countermeasure the Zoran deployed was met with an immediate human response, each more devastating than the last. Admiral Thos watched helplessly from the command sphere of the righteous intervention as ship after ship vanished from tactical displays blotted out by impossibly powerful blasts. The humans had not merely defended their world, they had turned it into a fortress of vengeance. Across Earth facilities that the Zoran had initially missed during their observations lit up with energy readings that made no scientific sense. Research laboratories, military black sites, even power plants were converted almost overnight into launch sites for weapon systems beyond anything in the Zoran database. It was as if humanity had been preparing for this moment for decades, perhaps even centuries. Communications Officer Vel reported through the chaos. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from the surface, a direct message from Human Command, patch it." Through Admiral Thos, ordered, bracing himself for what he already knew would not be good. A human voice came through, cold and emotionless. "You have committed an act of war against Earth by targeting non-combatants and healers. We offered no provocation, and yet you attacked our most sacred institutions. Now we will show you the cost of that mistake." The message ended, and no further communications were accepted by the humans. The righteous intervention shuddered again, this time from a coordinated strike delivered by a new formation of human vessels. Their designs were brutal, purely functional, built for war with no pretense of beauty. They moved with terrifying efficiency. Admiral Thos realized the horrible truth. The humans had been holding back all along. Their apparent primitiveness was a carefully maintained illusion, their visible technological level a deception. They had studied the Zoran even as the Zoran had studied them, and when provoked, they had unleashed capabilities so advanced they bordered on the incomprehensible. Around the fleet, Zoran ships were being systematically destroyed, not merely disabled, but annihilated in ways that left no chance for recovery. Strategic Officer Kep pulled up new data, his appendages trembling. "Admiral," he said, "we have confirmation. Multiple human factions have unified under a single command structure. Full planetary unification in under 3 hours. It should not be possible. It should take years to coordinate such disparate military and political forces. Yet the humans had done it instantly, driven by a single unifying cause: retaliation for the attack on their healers and wounded facilities. Human forces were now executing strategies that should have required months of planning, adapting fluidly to every change on the battlefield. Seraphim squadrons moved with mind-linked precision, targeting the largest and most critical Zoran ships with deadly focus. Ground-based particle accelerators beamed energy into low-orbit weapon systems that tore through Zoran shielding with ease. Entire cities redirected their power grids into experimental weapons programs that had been hidden away for decades, kept secret until the moment they were truly needed. President Marcus Reynolds stood before the Global Defense Council, grim-faced as he issued the final command: activate Project Seraphim and deploy the hypocrites for every hospital, every child, every patient they struck down. The humans had never sought war. They had invested their best minds and resources into healing and peace. But when provoked, when attacked at their most vulnerable, they unleashed a vengeance that was as calculated as it was unstoppable. Back in orbit, Admiral Thos realized the battle was lost. The righteous intervention was failing shields. At critical levels, core systems collapsing. The last sight he had before the command sphere was torn apart was the gleaming form of a human capital ship, launching a final devastating beam directly into the heart of his flagship. Aboard the few surviving Zoran escape pods, the reality of their situation became clear. Humanity had not only repelled their intervention, they had decisively and overwhelmingly crushed it. The pod carrying Commander VX Science, Officer Jez, Communications Officer, Vel Lieutenant, Pre and a gravely injured Admiral Thos drifted away from the burning debris fields of the once proud Zoran fleet. Each of them knew deep down they would carry the shame of this failure for the rest of their lives, and yet, even that shame paled in comparison to the fear they now carried for humanity had revealed their true nature, not as a divided primitive race, but as something else, entirely, something terrifying when provoked. Through the small viewport of their pod, Earth slowly receded in the distance deceptively peaceful, a serene blue marble against the backdrop of stars. But all 5 survivors knew the truth behind that calm facade. Humanity was now aware of the wider galaxy. They were not naive, they were not weak, and if ever provoked again, they would respond not as individuals, not as fractured nations, but as one united, unstoppable force. The Zoran had awoken a sleeping giant, and they would never forget the lesson they had learned in Blood and Fire. 27 cycles after their defeat, the 5 surviving members of the Zoran fleet stood before the High Council, their exoskeletons dulled by stress and inadequate nutrition. Their bodies weakened by the long journey home. Admiral Thos had to be supported by a medical hovering device, his injuries too severe to heal properly. Supreme Counselor Kix addressed them, her tone carefully. Neutral. You stand before this council as the only survivors of a fleet of 57 vessels and over 12,000 personnel. Explain yourselves. For the next 3 hours, the survivors recounted everything they had witnessed, the initial observations of human civilization, the gross misinterpretation of their medical facilities, the catastrophic humanitarian intervention, and finally the overwhelming human counterattack. When they finished, the chamber fell into a heavy silence, heavier than anything any of them had ever experienced before. General Krax, one of the oldest and most respected military leaders of the Zoran, finally broke the stillness. Let me understand this correctly, he said slowly. These humans whom we perceived as primitive and divided not only destroyed our technologically superior fleet, but also deciphered our language, cracked our security protocols, and now possess the coordinates of our home world. Commander VX nodded solemnly. Yes, General, and it is highly likely. They have also begun reverse engineering any technology recovered from our wreckage. Science Minister Zeph shifted uneasily, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with agitation. How could a species advance so quickly? It defies all of our evolutionary models. Admiral Thos drew a deep, painful breath before speaking. With respect, Minister, he said, we have been asking the wrong question. The relevant question is not how they advanced so quickly, but why they concealed their true capabilities. The council listened intently as Thos continued. I had much time to reflect during our journey home. Humans compartmentalize their civilization in ways we do not. They specialize to an extreme degree. Their healers focus exclusively on healing. Their warriors focus exclusively on warfare. Their scientists pursue knowledge for its own sake, developing technologies that are years or decades ahead of their practical application. And when threatened, particularly when their healers are attacked, these separate compartments unite with devastating efficiency. He paused, gathering his remaining strength. Humanity does not reveal all that it is, because it does not need to, but when it must, it transforms into something unstoppable, something terrifying. Esteemed Council, I recommend we classify humanity as a Category 1 threat. Admiral Thos declared, do not engage them. And furthermore, I suggest we share this classification with all spacefaring civilizations in the Galactic Accord, not as a gesture of hostility, but as a warning. A warning of what precisely Supreme Counselor Kix asked. Leaning forward, her eye stalks fully extended, Admiral Thoss fixed his gaze on every member of the council before answering. Solemnly, humanity is a species of contradictions. They heal with the same passion and dedication with which they wage war. Their capacity for compassion is matched only by their capacity for righteous retribution. And when their compassion is mistaken for weakness, they respond with a fury that consumes everything in its path. They are a species that names their most powerful warship. After the father of medicine, they attacked no one unprovoked, they showed patience and restraint, but when we made the fatal mistake of striking at their healers, they did not retaliate out of anger. They retaliated out of principle. They sent a message with their actions, not just to us, but to the galaxy at large. Attack our healers and we will send our angels of death. The council chamber remained deathly silent, each member processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. They had not merely lost a battle, they had fundamentally misunderstood an entire species, and in doing so had awakened a force that would forever change the galactic balance of power. The Zoran now faced a future where humanity was no longer an unknown, isolated species, but a rapidly ascending power capable of uniting their kind and unleashing technological horrors beyond comprehension. Admiral Thoss, his color dimming dangerously as his life signs continued to fade, spoke his final words to the council before being taken away for emergency treatment. "Remember this day," he whispered weakly. "Remember that we were the ones who provoked the storm, that we misjudged compassion for weakness and arrogance for wisdom. May the ancestors help any civilization foolish enough to make the same mistake we did." The surviving officers were dismissed, and the High Council immediately entered emergency session. Their minds weighed down by the knowledge that the galaxy was no longer the same as it had been before their disastrous first contact with Earth. As the emergency session of the Zoran High Council dragged on, the magnitude of their failure became clearer with each passing moment. Reports poured in from intelligence agents embedded across the galaxy, revealing a troubling trend. Humanity's devastating response to the Zoran intervention had not gone unnoticed. Other spacefaring civilizations had picked up on the electromagnetic bursts, the particle disruptions, and the unexplainable gravitational anomalies now recorded in the space surrounding Earth. Word was spreading fast. The story of how a supposedly primitive divided species had annihilated an elite Zoran battle fleet within hours was igniting both fear and fascination across the stars. Commander VX stood silently alongside his fellow survivors, each of them acutely aware that their testimony had reshaped galactic politics in ways no one could have predicted. Supreme Counselor Kix finally broke the heavy silence. "We must act before others make the same mistake." General Krax nodded grimly. "Humanity must be officially classified as a Category 1 threat, and every known civilization must be warned. This is not a matter of diplomacy. This is a matter of survival." Admiral Thoss weakly lifted his head from where he sat, supported by medical stabilizers. He spoke in a raspy voice, each word carrying the weight of his failing strength. "We must also acknowledge that humanity is unlike any species we have ever encountered. Their ability to specialize, compartmentalize, and unify under threat is unique in all of our records." Science Minister Zeph leaned forward, her patterns subdued. "What you are suggesting is that they are not just advanced in technology, but advanced in strategy and psychology." "Yes," Admiral Thoss confirmed. "Humanity does not wear all its capabilities openly. They build layer upon layer of deception, distraction, and defense, only revealing their true power when absolutely necessary. They are patient, calculating, and when provoked, utterly merciless." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. Knowing the truth of his words, Supreme Counselor Kix turned her gaze to the surviving officers. "Then let the record show that Earth and its inhabitants are to be placed under maximum non-engagement protocols. No Zoran vessel shall approach their system without explicit High Council authorization. No attempt at cultural interference. No monitoring missions. No covert operations. Humanity must be left alone, unless absolutely necessary. Admiral Thos breathed a faint sigh of relief. The humans were dangerous, but they were not expansionist by nature unless pushed. They had demonstrated that clearly when they responded only after provocation. General Krax spoke up again. His tone measured but grim. I propose we send a formal communique to every signatory of the Galactic Accord outlining exactly what transpired, complete with the full recordings of our observations and the battle. We must ensure no other species underestimates humanity as we did. There was unanimous agreement across the council chambers. The stakes were simply too high. In the days that followed, the Zoran meticulously compiled their data, presenting a narrative not of human barbarity, but of human complexity. A species capable of profound compassion, innovation, and cooperation, but equally capable of unleashing unimaginable fury when their core values were violated. The message was sent out across the stars, a warning wrapped in humility and regret. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity too was forever changed. President Marcus Reynolds stood before the newly established United Earth. Defense Council, the holographic projection of the planet spinning slowly behind him. For the first time in history, humanity was truly united, not by ideology or conquest, but by survival. We have learned today that we are not alone, he said, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. And we have shown those beyond our world that while we seek peace, we are not helpless. We will defend our own with every ounce of strength and brilliance we possess. The crowd of leaders, generals, scientists, and civilians erupted in solemn applause. It was not a celebration. It was an affirmation humanity would move forward with vigilance and resolve their hidden technologies, now fully embraced their divisions, cast aside, in favor of a greater purpose. Across the planet, facilities, once secret, were now operational defenses. Built in the shadows were now openly maintained alliances. Once fraught with distrust were now forged in the fires of necessity. Humanity had found its place in the stars not as conquerors but as survivors, as guardians of their own existence, and as a species that had learned that mercy and strength could walk hand in hand, but that mercy should never be mistaken for weakness. In orbit, above the recovering world, satellites were rebuilt, stations were fortified, and quiet ships patrolled the dark skies, watching, always watching, because they knew now with certainty that the universe was far larger, more dangerous, and more wondrous than they had ever imagined. And somewhere deep within every human heart there burned a new resolve, a silent vow that echoed the message they had sent to the stars. Attack our healers, and you will meet our angels of death. In the aftermath of the disastrous first contact with humanity, the Zoran High Council found itself facing an unprecedented crisis, not merely one of military defeat, but of existential dread. News of the event spread rapidly throughout the galactic community, shattering long-held assumptions about the nature of primitive civilizations and forcing a complete reevaluation of the delicate balance of power. Supreme Counselor Kix convened an emergency summit with representatives from the major civilizations across the galaxy. The gathering was unlike any before it, not in celebration, not in diplomacy, but in fear. The representatives listened in stunned silence as the Zoran survivors recounted their story, detailing how the attack on human medical facilities, an act intended as a humanitarian intervention, had instead triggered an overwhelming retaliation, the likes of which no one had imagined. The footage of human vessels tearing through Zoran fleets, the data showing rapid technological adaptation, the recordings of the human unified response. It was undeniable. Humanity was no ordinary emerging species. They were something else entirely. Something that defied conventional models of development. Supreme Counselor Kix addressed the assembly, her voice heavy with the gravity of their situation. "We misjudged them." She said plainly, they are not a species motivated by conquest, nor are they reckless or cruel. Their society values healing and compassion. But when those values are attacked, they respond with a unity and ferocity that makes them the most dangerous force we have ever encountered. She paused, letting her words sink in. Humanity must be recognized not just as a Category 1 threat, but as a critical unknown. We cannot predict their future evolution nor their potential capabilities within even a few of their solar cycles. Intelligence. Reports indicated that since the failed intervention, Earth's political structures had dissolved into a new global council. Military forces had merged. Scientific communities had aligned, and previously classified projects were now openly accelerating at breakneck speed. They were no longer preparing for defense. They were preparing for the future. As the summit continued, various delegates raised concerns. Would humanity seek revenge? Would they attempt expansion? Would they retaliate further? Admiral. Those who had been granted temporary stabilization through advanced medical support addressed these concerns in a voice weakened but unwavering. Humanity seeks no war, he said. They responded not out of aggression, but out of necessity. We attacked their core values, not their power structure. That is why their response was so absolute. We must not provoke them again. We must watch. We must learn. And above all, we must respect their sovereignty, or we will not survive. The Council of Worlds voted unanimously to adopt a non-engagement directive regarding Earth. A buffer zone was established around the solar system, with strict prohibitions against unauthorized entry or observation. Earth was declared a protected world, not out of charity or stewardship, but out of fear. Meanwhile, back on Earth, humanity was undergoing a renaissance unlike anything it had ever experienced. Freed from the shackles of internal conflict and driven by the memory of the near catastrophe, humans worked together with a single purpose. They expanded their space programs, accelerated fusion energy research, deployed new orbital defense platforms, and adapted technologies salvaged from the wreckage of the defeated Zoran ships. President Marcus Reynolds addressed the world again, standing before a holographic image of Earth, now ringed with new defensive satellites. "We did not ask for this knowledge," he said solemnly. "But now that we possess it, we have a responsibility to use it wisely. We will not seek war, but we will be ready if it comes again." Humanity had stepped fully into the galactic stage, not as helpless children, but as a young and fearsome power, aware of the dangers lurking among the stars, and determined to never again be caught unaware. Across the galaxy, other civilizations watched with a mixture of awe and terror, wondering what path humanity would choose. Some hoped for alliances, others feared eventual confrontation. But all understood one thing clearly: humanity had survived their first contact with an advanced species and had emerged stronger for it. They had made their stance clear to any who would listen. Attack their healers and they would answer with angels of death, and now everyone knew exactly what that meant. Humanity had revealed only a glimpse of its potential, and it was enough to shake the stars themselves. In the hidden chambers of power across countless worlds, discussions began: how to approach this new force, how to survive a galaxy that now had to reckon with the fierce protectors from the blue planet called Earth. Whether humanity would become a beacon of hope or a harbinger of reckoning, none could say, but one truth was undeniable. The galaxy would never be the same again, and neither would humanity. Their compassion remained, their willingness to heal remained, but woven through it now was a steel-hard thread of resolve, forged in fire and loss. They were healers, yes, but they were also warriors, and those who dared threaten their sanctuaries would face not naive primitives, but a unified, relentless species capable of unimaginable retaliation. The lesson of Earth would echo across the stars for millennia, a lesson written not in treaties or diplomacy, but in the wreckage of a once mighty fleet, and in the unbreakable will of a species that had proven beyond doubt that they would stand together no matter the cost. Even as Earth solidified its defenses and humanity stepped boldly into its new role among the stars, the lessons of that first disastrous encounter continued to shape both human and galactic policy. In the hidden depths of military think tanks and scientific institutes, humanity pored over every fragment of Zoran technology. Every intercepted transmission and every decoded signal. They understood now that the galaxy was not an empty void, but a crowded arena filled with civilizations both ancient and new, and they knew that misunderstanding and fear had nearly cost them everything. Humanity had learned the most painful lesson of all, that assumptions and arrogance, whether alien or human, could lead to catastrophe. It was a lesson they would not forget. The United Earth Defense Council expanded its reach, forming new branches, dedicated not just to military readiness, but also to diplomacy, cultural research, and linguistic analysis. Their goal was clear. Never again would humanity be blindsided by ignorance. President Marcus Reynolds established the Department of Interstellar Relations, recruiting the best minds in anthropology, xenolinguistics, and diplomacy to ensure that when humanity encountered other species in the future, they would do so with understanding and caution. Humanity was determined that their next contact would not be forged in fire and blood, but in knowledge and respect across the galaxy. The warnings sent by the Zoran survivors rippled outward. Worlds that had once considered Earth insignificant now updated their threat assessments and revised their diplomatic protocols. Earth was no longer a backwater planet of interest only. To scholars and fringe traders, it was now a recognized power, a force to be respected and feared. Yet amidst the fear, there was also curiosity. Civilizations that valued knowledge over conquest began to wonder if perhaps humanity could be an ally, rather than an enemy. Within human society itself, the changes ran deep. Former national rivalries faded in the face of a shared purpose. Space programs, once divided by politics and pride, now merged into a single cooperative endeavor. The lunar colonies were expanded not just as research outposts, but as early warning stations and defense platforms. Mars terraforming projects accelerated, aided by recovered Zoran terraforming algorithms. The asteroid belt was transformed into a sprawling network of mining and military facilities. Humanity was not retreating from the stars, they were reaching for them with renewed determination and wisdom. The cultural impact was profound. Artists, musicians, writers, and philosophers grappled with the implications of the new reality, themes of unity, survival, and the vast unknown filled galleries. Theaters and concert halls, humanity had seen the darkness beyond their world, and instead of cowering, they chose to create to celebrate their existence and to honor those who had fought and fallen in the defense of life. The phrase "an angel of death" became both a solemn warning and a badge of honor, a reminder that while humanity would always strive to heal and preserve life, they would never again allow themselves to be underestimated. The scientific community thrived. Breakthroughs came at a furious pace. Fusion power, space travel, genetic medicine, and quantum computing, all advanced by leaps and bounds, inspired in part by the technologies salvaged from the Zoran fleet, but also by the sheer determination to never be vulnerable again. Students in classrooms learned not just about their own history, but about the galaxy beyond, about the dangers and wonders that awaited them. Governments restructured education to emphasize critical thinking, empathy, and cultural understanding, knowing that the next generation would be the first true citizens of the stars. Yet even amidst the progress, there remained a somber undercurrent, a collective memory of how close humanity had come to annihilation. The orbital memorials built from the remnants of destroyed Zoran ships floated silently above Earth, serving as a constant reminder of both the price of survival and the responsibility that came with newfound power. Humanity, had survived because they had defended their healers, because they had refused to let fear divide them when it mattered most. It was a truth that resonated deeply across every culture and creed. It was not strength alone that had saved them, but unity, compassion, and the fierce will to protect life at any cost. And so Earth moved forward, wary but undeterred, ready to meet whatever challenges lay ahead across the endless sea of stars. They knew now that the universe was not a place of peace, but of constant vigilance, and that in protecting themselves they might one day be called to protect others as well. The spirit that had carried them through their darkest hour would guide them into the future, a spirit forged in compassion, tempered by fury, and unbreakable in its resolve. Humanity had entered the galactic stage not as conquerors, but as guardians, not seeking dominion, but prepared to defend themselves and others if ever called upon. In the end, it was not fear that defined them, nor vengeance, nor hatred. It was the simple, unyielding truth that when the sanctity of life is threatened, when healers are attacked, and innocents harmed, humanity will rise not as fractured nations, but as one, and they will answer, with a strength born of hope, and a fury born of love. As the years passed, the memory of the first catastrophic contact with humanity became etched into the collective consciousness of the galaxy. The story was told and retold, not as a tale of conquest or glory, but as a solemn lesson in humility and caution. Earth continued to grow in strength and wisdom, building alliances where it could, and standing firm where it must. Humanity did not seek to dominate the stars, nor did they aspire to create an empire. Instead, they focused inward, honing their strengths, healing their wounds, and preparing for whatever unknowns the future might bring. On Earth, the United Defense Council evolved into the United Earth Federation, a true planetary government formed not through coercion but through the shared memory of near extinction. The motto they chose was simple, but profound: United we endure. The lessons learned from the Zoran mistake shaped every policy, every decision, every diplomatic overture. Humanity had faced the abyss, and rather than fall, they had risen stronger and wiser. Their culture flourished in ways that would have been impossible before the Great Awakening. Science continued to advance at an unprecedented pace, driven by both human ingenuity and carefully adapted alien technologies. New propulsion systems allowed exploratory missions to reach neighboring star systems. Diplomatic missions were launched, carrying messages of peace, but always backed by the undeniable strength humanity now wielded. Education placed a strong emphasis on history, empathy, and cross-cultural understanding. Children learned not just about Earth, but about the stars beyond and the responsibilities that came with them. Humanity remembered their near destruction not with bitterness, but with determination to never repeat the mistakes that led them there. Meanwhile, the galaxy observed with wary respect. Earth was no longer viewed as a curiosity, but as a sovereign entity fully capable of defending itself and contributing meaningfully to the interstellar community. Other civilizations debated how to engage with humanity, but all understood the unspoken rule approach with respect, or not at all. Within the highest councils across countless worlds, Earth became a symbol, a reminder that assumptions and arrogance could be fatal, that even the most primitive appearing civilization could harbor depths of strength and unity unseen until provoked. As for the Zoran, they too changed forever. Their culture reeled from the humiliation, but in that defeat, they found something rare, a chance to grow, to confront their own prejudices and arrogance. Some among them called for vengeance, but wiser voices prevailed, pointing to the lessons humanity had taught them, not with words, but with action. The phrase first, understand, then act became the new guiding principle of Zoran foreign policy, and in quiet moments of reflection, many among them admitted that the humans had saved them from a much greater future mistake by forcing them to confront their own blind spots. Early Admiral Thos, whose health never fully recovered, lived long enough to see the first tentative overtures of reconciliation between the Zoran and humanity. Though formal alliances remained distant, there were signs of mutual respect, tiny seeds of hope planted in the soil of past bloodshed, in the great halls of Earth's institutions, and among the glittering towers of Zoran cities. The true meaning of that fateful encounter was studied, debated, and passed down through generations. It was not a story of war. It was a story of learning that the most powerful weapon any civilization possesses is not its armies or its technologies, but its understanding, its empathy, its willingness to see others not as threats, but as beings worthy of respect. The real battle was never fought with ships and weapons, but with assumptions and fears. And in the end, those willing to learn, willing to grow, were the true victors. In the modern age, as human vessels sailed deeper into the stars, carrying explorers, scientists, and diplomats, they bore with them not just shields and weapons, but stories of their past, of how they had once been attacked, of how they had once almost been destroyed, and how through unity, compassion, and fierce love for life, they had forged a future. From the ashes of near annihilation, and the galaxy still whispered of the angels of death that humanity had unleashed when provoked. But those who truly understood knew that the angels had always been there, not as bringers of destruction, but as guardians of life. The final lesson of Earth's Great Awakening was a simple one, but one that would echo through the corridors of time for all who cared to listen. Never mistake kindness for weakness. Never assume you understand a people by the surface you see, and never ever threaten those who are willing to die to protect their own. Because in the end, it is not the strongest who endure. It is the ones who remember what is worth fighting for, and who stand together no matter the cost.